Lisa is a junior professor for sustainable development and land use synergies and conflicts, a senior researcher here at CEF. And she will be presenting gender perspectives in land use research, thoughts and experiences from the LANUSYNCON project team. I hope I said it correctly. Please, Lisa.
Thank you very much for your introduction and for the chance to speak here today to you about some of the reflections and ideas that came to my mind when I thought about gender perspectives in the junior researchers group I'm heading. And in particular on land use research. So what matters there, and I think what we can maybe improve. So no, it's not. Oh, okay. So first, let me introduce you to the core questions we're working on in LANUSYNCON, specifically looking at East Africa, but also having a wider lens on the global scale. So one thing we're looking at are the different interactions between sustainable development goals in the context of land use and how they are interlinked with each other and what synergies and conflicts exist there. And then we are looking at decision options to implement SDGs and which decision options are being discussed and how would then they impact these conflicts and synergies between the SDGs. And the third research question we're looking at is what role do these synergies and conflicts play at science policy interfaces, and how do these science policy interfaces then again impact national policy? So as you can see, it's not really a like core gender topic, but obviously land use has to do also with gender things. So when I think about gender roles, and in particular women and land use research, there are two aspects that come to my mind that I think we need to talk about. One is the research on land use of women. So basically asking, what questions are we asking when we're doing land use research, and which perspectives do we consider in our research? Do we really consider the different perspectives of men as well as women, or do we maybe tend to concentrate on the perspectives of men? So I think this is one important part. And the other part, and I think that then also lines up very nicely what we just heard in a very interesting talk before, is who's doing the research. And so the question is, land use research being done by whom, and being done by women maybe then even as well. Asking the question, who's doing the research and under which conditions, and why do these conditions maybe differ between men and women? So let me start with that first aspect. So what questions do we ask and which perspectives do we consider? And to give you an idea what we're doing in LANUSYNCON, we're doing modeling. So we're doing Bayesian network modeling, and that starts with a conceptual model. So we are looking at synergies and trade-offs between SDGs. So here you can see the example of a conceptual model as it might look like for hunger and biodiversity conservation. And of course, agricultural measures, they have an impact on how much fertilizers do I use, what agricultural area do I need, and then they have an impact on the yields as well as on biodiversity through deforestation. So there are certain impact chains. Now, of course, what kind of agricultural measures are being implemented by a farmer, this decision is also influenced by a lot of different factors, such as land tenure, subsidies, land price, market access to information, but also what kinds of crops are being grown, which is then again impacted by things like soil quality and climate. But of course, gender equality also plays a role here, right? But then I was thinking, is that really the only thing, how that goes in there? And of course, then there are a lot of other areas that would need to go into this aspect of gender equality. And gender equality actually is connected, of course, to what is happening on the ground and on land. And that was also found out by a previous doctoral student of mine who was looking at in Kenya at different types of farmers. So it was like a typology that she developed for different smallholder farmers. And she compared in particular also organic certified versus conventional farmers. And what she found was that farmers with a higher share of organic certified production or mixed farmers, they had by tendency a higher gender equity in their household, which I think is interesting, and also a higher diet richness, so diversity, and also stronger social networks and resource endowment. So I think, of course, you can't really say that, you know, higher gender equity is leading to higher organic shares of organic farming or the other way around, but there seems to be some way of some connection. And so I think we need to think about women and the different gender roles that we're seeing in societies in multiple ways. And in particular, when we think about access to land, there are a lot of aspects that are playing a role here that we should consider probably even more in our project. So one is women's access to land is highly influenced by, of course, the formal legal system that we're having in a country. So what are the property rights, the inheritance systems? What are also the property rights if a woman gets divorced or if she marries? And how much land use control does she have? Then things like customs and religion, of course, also play an important role. So something that's maybe not really legally binding, but is still important for people. So the division of labor. What kind of responsibilities do women have when it comes to the extended family, but also what support do they get? The inheritance system, even if it's not legally, but what's the custom, and also what is the traditional rights of use of women. And then also we have, of course, the domestic unit that a woman lives in, and what structures do we find there? What's the decision-making powers of women? How does the community and household support system look like? And again, also here, what's the extended family responsibilities of women? And last but not least, also the economic and the educational system is playing important roles. So things like do women have access to credit and other inputs? What's the access to supplemental wages, as well as access to legal enforcement of their rights? And I think all of these aspects are important when we talk about women's impact and access to land, and then, of course, also the implementation of the SDGs on the ground. Now, when we talk about the second point, the question is who's doing the research and how can I consider female perspectives in the research by actually including women into the research as researchers, right? And under which conditions can women do this research? And I think there are a lot of great role models, not only in Europe, but also in Africa of female land use researchers. We have one here, Wangari Maathai, was the first female professor in Kenya and also the environmental minister there, and also won the Peace Nobel Prize for her Green Belt movement. So when I look at the team that I'm leading, the LANUSYNCON team, I think we're doing pretty well in terms of gender diversity. And if we look at, so this includes now master students, doctoral students, and assistants. If we look at doctoral students, it's about 50% female and male researchers. So I think this is all right. However, we were wondering if that is actually the case also if we look at land use science in general. And we are actually conducting at the moment kind of a systematic literature review where we are using the author names of publications in Landsize to automatically assess the share of diversity in terms of gender as well as ethnicity. Yeah? And I know it's not perfect to do that, just based on the name, but this is, we can just have a lot of different publications and doing it automatically. And I think it's it's an okay estimate. And so the preliminary results of 314,000 publications showed us that only 32% of the publications had women actually as either their first, middle, or last authors. So women are highly underrepresented. We plan to do more analysis also then looking at these interaction effects between gender and ethnicity, which I think then also goes into this direction of the presentation we heard before. where we are not only looking at, what role women, what's the difference between men and women in terms of share of authors, but also how does that differ between different ethnicities. And so what we've seen in terms of ethnicity so far is that there seems to be a strong underrepresentation of Black and Asian ethnicities and an overrepresentation of white authors, but we haven't looked at these interactions between women and men yet, so this is going to be interesting. Now, the question is, why do women publish less? I don't think it's because they're not capable of doing it, but I think it has to do with this gap that we are seeing all over the world. So when we have this pre-publication phase of people starting studying, we actually have still like a 50-50 proportion. But then when it comes to this, what I call the publication phase here, so when students become doctoral students, when they do their habilitations, and especially when they become professors, we see this increasing gap between men and women. And that, of course, then leads to just a lower number of publications for women. And the question, of course, then is why do so many women basically leave the scientific career path? And I think, COVID has shown us what some major reasons are. Women tend to be the caretakers of families. They tend to take care of the household as well as children when they need to, and if there are no other systems or other systems are failing, and that then of course limits their ability to keep up with what men might be doing. And this is also a study that found that women just tend to leave scientific careers more frequently than men when becoming parents. They tend to move either to part-time or they even leave workforce entirely. And so for women, this is almost 50%. And for men, this share is about 25%. So there's a significant difference, right? Coming to my last point, what can we now do to make our research and research projects more gender sensitive? I think it's important that we need to consider the impacts of women on land use and decisions and how land is being managed. And I think it's helpful if we empower women as stakeholders in our research, also as decision makers, but also as researchers. And maybe what we actually need to do to empower women is also to empower men, but not as researchers in that case, but rather as caretakers of their families, right? So I think it's just the other side of the coin that we also need to consider here. And I'm optimistic and that by doing that, we can actually push systemic change for gender sensitive research, land use policies, and equality between men and women. So with that, I would like to thank you very much.